Hi, my name is Jim, this handsome fellow here is George, and this is our review of DarkSword Armory's Alexandria sword. The sword itself is classified as an oakshot type 18C and is a cut and thrust weapon, but before I get more into the characteristics of the sword itself, I'd like to talk about its history, which is what truly makes this sword unique. The following info was borrowed from DarkSword's own website, the Metropolitan Museum of Art's website, Christie's.com, and from a 2016 article from Nerdist.com by Sarah Chiartis. So we know that the original sword was forged in northern Italy, probably during the very early 15th century. From there, it could have changed hands several times and may even have been wielded by soldiers in different armies. You see, it was common in the Middle Ages for weapons to be collected by the victors from fallen warriors on the battlefield and simply used again in the next conflict. It's possible that that is what happened to this sword's original until it finally came into the possession of the Cyprian kings at some point. In 1419, the king of Cyprus, Janus de Lusignan, gave the sword to the Mamluk Sultan al-Muayyad as tribute. Shortly afterward, the sword became part of a larger donation of arms from the Sultan to the arsenal at Alexandria in Egypt, of course. Along with the other donated weapons, the sword was engraved with the name of the donor and the year. Here is a close-up of the engraving from the Met's website. Translated from Arabic, the inscription reads, "Donation of Al-Malik al-Muayyad Abu al-Nasir Shaykh to the Armory in the frontier city of Alexandria in the year 822, which is 1419 AD in the Western calendar." There the sword stayed until the Ottoman Empire invaded the Mamluk Sultanate in 1517, where the sword once again became war booty and was removed from the Alexandria arsenal and brought to Constantinople, named Istanbul since 1930, probably to the St. Irene arsenal. The sword was then transferred to Constantinople's Makkah Armory, probably in the 1800s. Fast forward to 1919, and Dr. Bachelor, the founding curator of the Arms and Armor Department at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, was touring Europe looking for and buying swords for the museum as well as for his own personal collection. It was during this trip that he visited the Armory in Constantinople and discovered a matching pair of 15th century long swords in a repository, both of which he bought and brought to America. One, which became known as the Bachelor sword, was bequeathed by Bachelor to the Met. He gave the other to his sister Harriet, and so it became known as the Harriet sword. Harriet had the sword in her possession until her death in 1943, when it was presumably sold at auction and simply disappeared. Now, as is the case with most historical relics that go missing, the sword could very well have been lost forever had it not been for a chance encounter in 2013. Howard Dixon, an arms and armor specialist for Christie's, was in a Texas restaurant looking at photos of a collection of weapons that had recently been consigned for sale. One of the photos first caught his eye, then evidently sent his heart racing. Dixon himself used the words "stunned disbelief" as he sat there looking at an image of the Harriet sword, found at last after having been lost for 70 years. With the sword back in the public eye, and thanks to his reputation in the world of medieval arms, the founder of DarkSword Armory, Eyal, was able to hold and examine the original on which he modeled his rendition of the Harriet sword. DarkSword's Alexandria is 45 inches long, overall has a blade length of 33.5 inches, and weighs about 4 pounds, which means that it is slightly longer and heavier than the original, with a shorter blade and a grip that is about 2 inches longer. Now, some history purists may scoff at such a liberty taken, but I have another sword that weighs exactly the same, yet the Alexandria sword feels like it weighs much less because of the weight distribution and point of balance due to the longer handle. It is very easy to maneuver, and even though it's clearly a two-hander, as you can see, it can be wielded with little effort with just one hand. I mean, the thing is just, it's amazing. The sword is forged from 5160 high carbon steel. For those that may be unfamiliar with the AI/SI numbers, the 5 in 5160 means that the major alloying metal is chromium to prevent rust, though only 1% by mass, hence the 1 after the 5. This means that even though the blade is super durable, it will rust and so should be wiped down with some oil every now and again, even if it just hangs on your wall, like these. The blade is dual tempered to a hardness of 60 on the Rockwell scale at the edges and 48 to 50 at the core. What that translates to is that the blade is tough yet flexible and that it will retain its edges after repeated use. The sword has a leather-wrapped wood grip, and like the original, the wheel pommel has circular recesses on each side, as you can see there. Like all of DarkSword's swords, the Alexandria is peened, meaning that the tang, or part of the sword's blade that runs through the grip, is hammered over the pommel. Now, when purchasing the sword online, you can opt for a blunt or sharpened blade and for a scabbard with or without a French tie sword belt. I typically select the scabbard only, as most of my swords are displayed on walls, though I have bought a few with belts. Here is a scabbard that comes with the Alexandria, as you can see. And here's another that came from another DSA sword that I bought. Nice little belt there, French tie. So when I purchased this sword, the Arabic inscription wasn't yet available, but every Alexandria sword from DSA now comes with the engraving. This means that your sword will be as authentic as you can, shy of forking over the roughly 300 grand that the original appraises for. Yeah, that's pretty much it for the details. Let's go see how this thing cuts, shall we? No, George, we're going to test it on pumpkins. That was pretty cool. I mean, it's one way to carve a jack-o'-lantern, right? It's much more fun. Well, that about does it for our review. I suppose that the takeaway from this video is that DSA's Alexandria sword is a well-balanced and well-made, hand-forged replica of a historical sword, yet with better balance than the original. The sword is the perfect combination of form and function. The details are nearly identical to the Harriet Dean sword from which it was modeled, and the sword itself is as tough as it is pretty. Beautiful. Of course, some liberties were taken, like the fact that the grip is longer than the original, but this was done for a reason, and I'm sure that anyone carrying this sword into battle 600 years ago would have been very happy with the longer grip and therefore better balance. So much so that perhaps whoever lost it would have instead been victorious and kept it along with their life. Well, I think that's about it for our review. Thank you for watching. George, anything you want to add?